Hello, everyone. My name is Tawfiq Al-Kalani, and the presentation I want to give to everybody today is about the role of genetics in alcoholism. Just broadly, alcoholism has always interested me, so I want to talk about that in general. But specifically, a subcategory that I want to focus on is whether current alcoholics have a genetic predisposition to the behavior by virtue of their parents' genes. And before I really start with this, I just want everyone to understand why I chose the topic, and that's mainly because I'm very interested in the whole, philosophical outlook on psychology. Like at Wayne State, they have like a class called the philosophy of psychology, and what most people don't realize is that historically speaking, psychology is a splinter of philosophy. Philosophy was always the main umbrella, and psychological questions were always answered by philosophers. And over time, psychology branched out and became its own distinct category of science, its own discipline. And so, some of the hard questions that philosophers and psychologists have always asked themselves is questions of innate disposition, whether you're born a blank slate or not. And so in class, we had an entire discussion on where we think the whole nature versus nurture thing lies, and that's why I wanted to choose alcoholism to really talk about to see how does that manifest itself into something as severe as alcoholism, because obviously alcoholism is something that's very prevalent in our society. So, what is alcoholism exactly? Alcoholism is defined by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration as a condition where individuals can no longer control their use of alcohol compulsively, abuse it despite negative ramifications, and or experience emotional distress when they are not drinking, maybe suffering from an alcohol use disorder or alcoholism. Interestingly enough, in my language, in Arabic, um, alcohol is known as alcohol or al-ghul, and that's really where the word alcohol comes from. It's native to the Arabic language, and in Middle Eastern folklore, a ghul is kind of like a demonic spirit that sucks at you, and that's the etymological root of where the word came from. And I think that's kind of interesting because it shows you what ancient societies and ancient wisdom and ancient folklore had to say about alcohol. So they viewed it in a very negative fashion. So most people who do develop alcoholism develop it by virtue of them drinking socially. It's usually actually developed during people our age when they're in university and they're drinking at parties and stuff like that and drinking socially, and they feel peer pressured or they just want to try something new, and then before they know it, they get clinged on and they develop alcoholism. So why exactly is alcoholism a problem? Alcoholism is a serious issue in America because of the overwhelming, numbers of people that die due to drunk driving. They say that there's a statistic where 15 to 20% of people who drink alcohol have a wipeout rate where they're no longer able at one point in time to work in the workforce. Around 100,000 people die every year because of alcoholism, including deaths due to organ damage. Chronic heavy drinking also increases the risk of kidney disease, diabetes, and several cancers. Alcohol may also be used as a coping mechanism for prior traumas experienced early in one's life, with the numbing effects of the substance allowing them to dull the psychological damage temporarily. Alcohol is also responsible for 5% of all deaths on the planet. And just to give you guys an idea, that's as much as the bubonic plague wiped out when it first came out. So almost three percentage-wise, 5%, almost 3 million humans every year. More than 200 types of diseases or injuries stem from alcohol consumption, and almost 29% of all reported injuries, accidents, violence, and suicide are due to alcohol use. And according to a report conducted by the FBI, over 1.4 million drivers were arrested for driving under the influence of alcohol or narcotics in 2010. And this is all according to the World Health Organization. So the defining factors that contribute to alcoholism, the factors that contribute to whether an individual has the propensity to develop signs of systematic alcohol abuse range from those present in the environment, along with increasing amounts of research suggesting that genetics factors play a role in displaying the behavior as well. And I'll go more into depth into this later. Research shows, and this is a quote that I got from the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, says that genes are responsible for about half of the risk for alcohol addiction. Therefore, genes also do not determine whether someone will develop alcohol addiction. Environmental factors as well as gene environment interactions account for the remainder of the risk. So this is really interesting because if you guys remember in class, when Leah was asking us all, what do you think the percentages are for nature versus nurture? And everything kind of ranged in the 50% category. So that was really interesting how the scientific literature, the overwhelming consensus of scientists is also about 50% nurture, 50% nature. So that was very interesting for me. Alcoholism and the role in the environment. Environmental factors that play a role in shaping or establishing alcoholism include aggressive behavior in childhood, lack of parental supervision, poor social skills, alcohol and drug experimentation, poverty, availability of alcohol, and peer pressure. There's a very important distinction to be made that I learned about when doing research, which is the difference between genetic and hereditary conditions. The main difference between these two terms lies in the fact that hereditary diseases have the potential of being carried from one generation to another, whereas a genetic disease can either be hereditary or not, but there will always be a mutational change. This kind of just reiterates what I just said, where genetics diseases can either be hereditary or not, but there will always be a mutational change in the genome. Interestingly enough, a 2008 study conducted by the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism reviewed much of the research on alcohol use disorder and a possible genetic contribution. The study ended up concluding that genetic factors account for 40 to 60% of the variance among people who struggle with alcohol use disorder. Since then, some specific genes that contribute to alcohol use disorder have been found, and they correlate with the development of the reward center in the brain. So this was also very interesting to me because in class, I think the most off from 50% that I heard with the whole nature versus nurture debate was 40%. So 40-60, also interestingly enough, is the range that the scientific community kind of has been going back and forth and debating. So that was definitely interesting for me. How do genetic properties inform the condition? Well, for one, smaller amygdala. People who have a family history of alcoholism have, in some studies, been shown to have a smaller than average amygdala. This is part of the brain that likely plays a role in the emotions associated with cravings. Different warning signs would be the second. People who have a genetic predisposition to alcohol use disorder may experience fewer or different warning signals from the brain or body when they need to stop drinking. Abnormal serotonin levels would be the third. Serotonin is one of the most important mood-regulating neurotransmitters and closely associated with depression. Unusual levels of serotonin have also been associated with people who are genetically predisposed to alcohol use disorder. So how do genetic properties inform the condition? Other factors that can influence the expression of alcoholism genes include early drinking age, history of abuse, and mental health problems. Psychiatric conditions, including depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, ADHD, schizophrenia, put a person at higher risk of developing alcohol use disorders. It is believed that alcohol may be used as a way to self-medicate certain mental health symptoms like mood swings. Ways to help prevent against the development of alcoholism: good self-control, parental monitoring and support, good grades, anti-alcohol policies, neighborhood resources, knowing family history of substance abuse, maintaining healthy friendships, enforcing strong family ties, seeking relationship counseling. So my conclusion, really, and final thoughts is that through doing all my research, I found like this meta study that was done very recently in 2014 by German scientists, where they essentially found that they took like a whole bunch of data points, right? They started out with 6,085 genes that they found some type of correlation with when it came to alcoholism. After they put it under lots of scrutiny and subjected it to more, tests, they came down to like 3,142 genes that had also, some additional line of evidence, and with like S&P values and using many other statistical criteria, they watered it down even more to 135 genes. And then they finally did some really, really strong correlational factors on mice. And they came out with just 11 genes that, suggest that it captures the key, like behavioral relevant genes on mouses when it comes to alcoholism. So all in all, I think the research on whether some genes affect alcoholism or not is not yet well established, because there's only correlation up until now, but no causation has been established. And also, most of the research has been done on mice, such as this one I just referred to with German scientists. Um, so yeah, I mean, you guys can make your own personal opinions on this, but as far as hard science goes and empiricism and the scientific method, nothing concrete has come up of yet, right? And there was this like really interesting research that came out a few years ago where like the best amount of alcohol to drink is no amount of alcohol at all, right? So according to the Global Burden of Disease Study, which analyzed the use of alcohol in 195 countries from the year 1990 to 2016, they came out with that the best amount of alcohol to drink is just none at all. So some people might think that like, oh, if I drink 1 cup of alcohol a day, this is like good for my heart. And although that may be true, that's only looking at it from one variable standpoint. But this study, this meta study, looked at it from like 23 health outcome variables, right? And it looked from 694 data sources and 592 prospective and retrospective studies. And after all of this research, looking at it from a multivariable and multifaceted standpoint, they came out with the fact that it's best not to drink alcohol at all and just totally abstain from it. And, funnily enough, Donald Trump does not drink any alcohol at all, and he actually denies his kids from drinking it. So his kids also do not drink any alcohol. Now, I don't know if Donald Trump's a perfect example to give or not when it comes to abstaining from alcohol, but, that's an example for you guys, a very popular celebrity and the president of the United States that practices total abstinence when it comes to alcohol. So thank you guys very much for listening to me. Totally appreciate it. Great semester. Have a nice day.